Hello and welcome to Eva's House of Spirit. I'm Eva, and today I want to talk a little bit about magical education. And I'd like to also make two book recommendations that I feel would be very good for those among us who are just starting out from the bare bones scratch minimum in their seeking to learn about magic as a lifestyle. And the first thing I'd like to say is that I believe that book learning is a very good method of building up one's magical education, but I think book learning is best complemented and supplemented by learning from other practitioners, either face-to-face or through online interaction. YouTube channels can be helpful, Facebook groups can be helpful, getting to know the proprietors or regular customers in New Age shops can be helpful, blogs can be helpful, radio shows on Blog Talk Radio can be helpful. The point I'm trying to make is there are many sources of information out there, and I think you shouldn't limit yourself to just one. It's good to well-round your learning by approaching your magical education from a wide variety of sources of information. And I feel that if you do that, if you gain knowledge from many sources, you'll probably become a better rounded practitioner. I also want to remind everyone, you shouldn't, I think, take everything you read or hear as gospel truth. You should do your own research, trust your instincts, check with more than one source to be sure that the information that you're getting is not one person's perspective alone, or that it's not false. And I think it's important also to know fact versus opinion versus theory versus what some would call UPG, which stands for undocumented personal gnosis. What that is sometimes practitioners will have their own experiences that cannot be proven as solid fact. How about I give you an example? You meet someone who tells you, oh, I know this is true. You know, Minerva told me so. Well, okay. For that person, that's their truth. For you, on the other hand, how do you know, honestly, that Minerva really told him that? You kind of can't know, you kind of don't know, because Minerva didn't tell you that. That said, these points made, I want to make two recommendations that I think are very good. The first one that I'd like to make for someone who literally is just starting out from like the bare basics would be True Magic by Amber Kay. This is an older edition. There is a newer edition available now. The first thing I like about this book is that the first question this book asks is, why do you want to do magic? And I think that is such an important question because I think a lot of people don't stop and ask themselves that question. I do believe that if someone is approaching this lifestyle for the right reasons, it can be of great benefit to oneself and to those who are in your life and those who you come to affect. But I also believe that if one is adopting this lifestyle for the wrong reasons, I think it could kind of be a bit of a counterproductive experience. That said, I would like to say this book is written from a bit of a Wiccan perspective. Not entirely so. The author does go into some very good topics. Let me just read to you the chapter titles, and you'll get an idea of the kinds of topics that she goes into. Chapter 1, about magic and you. Chapter 2, your magical education. And this is a really good chapter because she talks about some interesting things, such as evaluating teachers, which I think is a good topic to consider, a good point to consider. She also talks about the question of fees, learning magic with books. These are things that may be helpful to someone just starting out. She also then, in chapter 3, goes on to discuss the varieties of magic, and she talks about styles of magic and some magical traditions. She also mentions some famous magicians of the ages in that chapter. Chapter 4, how magic works. Chapter 5, preparing yourself for magic. Chapter 6, magic in your health. Chapter 7, your preparation continues, in which she discusses the pyramid of magic, learning to raise and channel power, choosing a magical name. Chapter 8, change, death, and magic. She discusses what is death, the lessons of past lives. Chapter 9, she talks about getting ready for ritual. Chapter 10, creating and performing ritual. Chapter 11, she goes into spellcraft, the techniques of magic, and she gives some spells and some techniques. Chapter 12, she discusses ethics and hazards. Chapter 13, your magical education continues. She discusses in that chapter learning from nature, practice, and experimentation as well. And then in the conclusion, she has Appendix 1 is a glossary of terms. Appendix 2, elements and correspondences, which is very important, I think, for someone who is just starting out to really get familiar with, because correspondences and elements, knowing these, it's a very crucial part of having a solid magical foundation, I think. And then in Appendix 4, she has a suggested reading list. So yeah, I think this book is probably the book, if I had to say like the very first book I would recommend someone read, I would recommend True Magic by Amber Kay. And I think if someone has been practicing a while and they just kind of want to review, this is a good book as well. This other book here is great for beginners. This is probably the second book I would recommend. And this is also good for intermediate practitioners. It's called Practical Solitary Magic by Nancy B. Watson. Very, very solid book. This is a great, great book. Even better, honestly, I think, than True Magic by Amber Kay. Although I think True Magic by Amber Kay, I would recommend it as the first book to read. This one I would say would be your second book to read. This book is really cool because it starts out, she talks about some basic principles, some ethics, and then she goes into chapters that she devotes to what she calls the 4 planes. She talks about the physical plane, the emotional plane, the mental plane, the spiritual plane, for example. And the reason why she separates information under these categories is that she literally talks about these 4 planes per se that are elemental in nature, which are all important cornerstones in having a solid method of practice. Physical plane, that would be your earth element. The emotional plane, that would be your water element. The mental plane, that would be your air element. And the spiritual plane, that would be your fire element. And it's important to have physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-rounded, what's the word I'm looking for? Components, approaches, aspects to the work that you do. She discusses magic and psychology, how magic works, the importance of temperament. That's in the first chapter, Magic in the Mind. Chapter 2, Magic and Ethics, Magic and Personal Relationships. She discusses ethical magic. Then in part 2, the architecture of magic, she has chapter 3, which is the 4 planes. And then chapter 4, she will then, after this chapter 3, she will then go on to chapter 4, where she talks about the mental plane, setting your goal, defining your goal, anticipating consequences, expressing your goal safely, writing down your goal, divination, affirmations and incantations, oracles, astrology, numerology, and magic, creating and using affirmations. Then she talks about 3 steps to effective affirmations, She gives some exercises. Exercise 1, positive energy affirmation. Exercise 2, receptivity affirmation. Tips on using affirmations. Prosperity affirmations. Magical incantations. And then she summarizes as well, which is good. At the end of each of these chapters on the planes, she summarizes to kind of, be sure that you've really grasped everything in that chapter. Chapter 5, the spiritual plane. Choosing archetypes. Exercise, where was I? Exercise 3, using the pendulum. Exercise 4, seeking pendulum advice. Establishing a bond with your chosen archetype. I mean, I could just go on and on. I strongly recommend this book, Practical Solitary Magic. And I know that there are some people that like to be more socially connected in their practice. Maybe they like to be part of a circle. Maybe they've sought out and joined a coven. Doesn't mean you can't also work on your own. And I think that this book is extremely helpful for people that may want to go on and join a group later or a circle later, because if you haven't, I think, begun to develop yourself as an individual in a solitary sense, it's not that you can't be of benefit to a group, but I think it would be helpful to have the foundation of having developed somewhat, to some extent, yourself first. So that when you do connect with and work with others, you sort of have something to bring to the table, if that makes any sense. But, I mean, hey, it's not to say that you can't start from scratch and just kind of learn as you go with the group, and it's not that you can't, I'm not saying you have to read this book and really grasp everything in it before you join a group. I'm not saying that either, but I'm saying that if you're not quite ready, you may want to read this first. You may want to do some solitary work first, and then consider later on joining a group. Maybe you choose that you just don't feel that you ever want to join a group. Well, that's fine too. Or maybe you started out in a group already. Well, it doesn't hurt to read things like this, because you know what? The fact is, sometimes maybe your group won't always be there, and sometimes you have to or want to work on your own as well, and that's fine. And I think it's good to sort of supplement your learning with others with learning on your own. It doesn't hurt. Learning is learning. So that said, I hope I've covered everything I want to cover. I hope I made sense. I do honestly stand by my 2 recommendations of True Magic by Amber Kay and Practical Solitary Magic by Nancy B. Watson. And if you've enjoyed this video, please like it. Feel free to comment if you have any questions or anything you just want to say. Please, I welcome your comments. Feel free to share this video on social media. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, I welcome you to subscribe. Please do subscribe. And you may want to consider joining Eva's House of Spirit on Facebook. We're always welcoming new members. We're a community of learning, sharing, and growth. That said, till our next exchange, blessed be and ashe.